Though the identity of this man is unknown, we do know some of the things he said. Here are some of them. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 chilling things the Zodiac Killer has said. Make sure you're subbed to the channel and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload new video. Anyways, let's report some crimes. At number 10, the Zodiac Killer was infamous for leaving ciphers and codes at the scene of many crimes, some of which are still unknown to this day. Zodiac loved to toy with law enforcement, often completely mocking them in the notes he'd leave behind. One of his quotes is this: "I want to report an assassination. No, a double assassination. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Gia. I'm the one who did it." There he goes, toying with the police. Many criminals have tried to mess with the cops while on the run, but most of them got caught in the end. Zodiac was clearly too smart for that. Number 9, Zodiac had many wishes and thoughts about the future. His thoughts of what happens after passing away are definitely out there. "I like ending people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than ending a wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To remove something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I pass away, I'll be reborn in paradise, and all that I have ended will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow me down or stop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." That's the craziest theory for the afterlife I've ever heard. At number 8, as said earlier, Zodiac just loves clowning the cops. Want another example? Here's another quote from him. "The police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them." See? He's honestly just trolling them at this point. And the worst part is that he was right. The police really did never catch him. The Zodiac ended 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969, operating in rural, urban, and suburban settings. He targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. His known attacks took place in Benicia, Vallejo, unincorporated Napa County, and the city of San Francisco proper. 2 of his wounded victims survived. The Zodiac claimed to have executed 37 victims. He's been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or just outside the state. Number 7, the Zodiac didn't just threaten and make fun of the police. On some occasions, he sent letters to newsletters and publishers. Here's a note he sent to the Chronicle. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am rather unhappy because you people will not wear some nice Zodiac symbol buttons. So I now have a list, starting with the woman, that I have a rather interesting ride for a couple hours one evening a few months back that ended in my burning her car where I found them." It seems here that he's alluding to an assassination he committed involving burning a woman's car. The thing is, no such execution was found in link to the Zodiac. Was he making it up, or have the police just not found him? By the way, I said that note as it was written. He has like purpose spelling mistakes in all of his notes. That's very confusing. Number 6, aren't convinced he hates the police? I got another quote for you of him ridiculing them. Here it is. "This is the Zodiac speaking. Like I have always said, I am crack proof. If the blue meanies are ever going to catch me, they had best get off their fat butts and do something, because the longer they fiddle and fart around, the more slaves I will collect for my afterlife. I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they are only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. The reason I'm writing to the Times is this: they don't bury me on the back pages like some of the others." Zodiac intentionally spells many words in his notes incorrectly, along with adding various letters and numbers at the bottom of the notes occasionally. This is to give hints and clues for the police detectives to solve the ciphers he gives them. At number 5, when Zodiac stated that he would make things much harder for the police. "This is the Zodiac speaking. Up to the end of October 1st, I have ended 7 people. I have grown rather angry with the police for their telling lies about me. So I shall change the way of the collecting of slaves. I shall no longer announce to anyone when I commit my crimes. They shall look like routine robberies, executions of anger, and a few fake accidents, etc. I'm sure this slowed down the hunt for the Zodiac, as without his announcements, an execution could be from anyone. Copycats were sure to be happy about this, as they could pretend to be the Zodiac when they execute people." Number 4, when he wrote a note on the back of a comic strip. The Zodiac plays the police and the public like a joke. He attempts humor occasionally, and this quote is one of these times. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I thought you would need a good laugh before you hear the bad news, and I can't do a thing with you. Could you print this new cipher on your front page? I get awfully lonely when I am ignored, so lonely I could do my thing." The reference of needing a good laugh is because he has the note on a comic strip. The Zodiac threatens to continue his crimes if the ciphers don't get posted on the front page of the newspaper, chilling the editors, I'm sure. Number 3, when the Zodiac threatened a detective. On October 27, 1970, Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, who had been covering the Zodiac case, received a Halloween card signed with the letter Z and the Zodiac's crossed circle symbol. Handwritten inside the card was the note, "Peekaboo, you are doomed." The threat was taken seriously and was the subject of a front-page story in the Chronicle. Soon after receiving the letter, Avery received an anonymous letter alerting him to the similarities between the Zodiac's activities and the unsolved execution of Sherry Jo Bates, which had occurred 4 years earlier at the City College in Riverside in the greater Los Angeles area, more than 400 miles or 640 kilometers south of San Francisco. Avery reported his findings in the Chronicle on November 16, 1970. Number 2, when he explained his initials and left a bad movie review. Of further communications sent by the public to members of the news social media, some contained similar characteristics of previous Zodiac writings. The Chronicle received a letter postmarked February 14, 1974, informing the editor that the initials for the Symbionese Liberation Army spelled out an Old Norse word meaning execute. However, the handwriting was not authenticated as the Zodiac's. A letter to the Chronicle, postmarked May 8, 1974, featured a complaint that the movie Badlands was execution glorification and asked the paper to cut its advertisements. Signed only a citizen. The handwriting, tone, and surface irony were all similar to earlier Zodiac communications. The Chronicle subsequently received an anonymous letter, postmarked July 8, 1974, complaining of their publishing the writings of the anti-feminist columnist Marco Spinelli. The letter was signed The Red Phantom, Red with Rage. The Zodiac's authorship of this letter is debated. Number 1, his last note. On March 3, 2007, an American greeting Christmas card sent to the Chronicle, postmarked 1990, in Eureka, was rediscovered in their photo files by editorial assistant Daniel King. This letter was handed over to the Vallejo police. Inside the envelope with the card was a photocopy of 2 US postal keys on a magnet keychain. The handwriting on the envelope resembles Zodiac's print, but was declared inauthentic by forensic document examiner Lloyd Cunningham. However, not all Zodiac experts agree with Cunningham's analysis. There is no return address on the envelope, nor is his crossed circle signature to be found. The card itself is unmarked. The Chronicle turned over all the material to the Vallejo police for further analysis. These are the top 10 chilling things Jeffrey Dahmer has said. Number 10, his outlandish admission to attempting to make zombies. The executing was a means to an end. That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. That's why I tried to create living zombies with uric acid in the drill to the head. But it never worked. No, the executing was not the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted. This admission is extremely unsettling and hard to believe. Jeffrey Dahmer would often inject various fluids into the brains of his victims in an attempt to create the perfect obedient servant. Number 9. His creepy obsession with being close with all of his victims. I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with 10 different skulls and skeletons. It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. If I couldn't keep them with me whole, I at least could keep their skeletons. This isn't the first time Dahmer explained how he wanted to keep the victims with him, but this one chills me the most. This quote, paired with the realization that he was consuming his victims, is just one of those things you only hear about in movies. Multiple people tried to expose his crimes before he was actually arrested, but because of racism and homophobia from the authorities, he was allowed to continue. Number 8. The quote of completely admitting to the execution of his victims. To this day, I don't know what started it, the murders. The person to blame is sitting right across from you. It's the only person, not parents, not society, not adult content. I mean, those are just excuses. This quote is especially freaky because he just outright admits that he was the only reason he did the things he did. Dahmer was an extremely ill man. His childhood consisted of his mother almost taking her own life and his father being neglectful. Unfortunately for Dahmer, this quote is most likely untrue. It is a well-known and studied theory that early childhood development plays a large role in the development of psychopathy, especially when exposed to a dysfunctional family. Number 7. His explanation of why he was unempathetic and had an immoral attitude. If a person doesn't think there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behaviors to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from slime. When we passed, that was it. There's nothing. Dahmer's religion is very confusing and convoluted. He used to be of the Christian faith, but somewhere along the road he switched. The ideology from this quote comes from his earlier beliefs as an atheist. However, after the executions and some time until his trial, he seemingly completely converted into Christianity again, going so far as to quote the Bible directly during confessions. Number 6. His first execution. I wasn't looking for anyone, but about a mile away from the house, there he was, hitchhiking along the road. He wasn't wearing a shirt, he was attractive. I was attracted to him. I stopped, then passed him and stopped the car and thought, well, should I pick him up or not? And I asked him if he wanted to go back and engage in substance use. And he said, oh yeah. And we went into my bedroom, had some drinks, and from the time I spent with him, I could tell he wasn't gay. I didn't know how else to keep him there other than to get the barbell and to hit him over the head, which I did, then strangled him with the same barbell. Dahmer's first victim was Stephen Hicks in 1991. He was especially brutal when it came to how he treated him even after his passing. The parents of Stephen once wished that Dahmer could feel their agony. His father stated that Stephen would never miss a Christmas, and that's how he knew he wasn't coming back before he was pronounced deceased. Number 5. When he came to peace with himself after his admission. Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted to pass for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did, but not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. Perhaps one of the most unnerving things about the peculiar case of Jeffrey Dahmer would be how calm and collected he was during his interviews and trials. He always seemed like a calculated criminal, which probably led to the internet giving so much attention to the recent Netflix documentary. Number 4. When he accepted his own sociopathic tendencies regarding his emotionless stoicism. I don't even know if I have the capacity for normal emotions or not, because I haven't cried for a long time. You just stifle them for so long that maybe you lose them, partially at least. I don't know. It has been proven that stifling emotions can be extremely detrimental to your mental health. It often leads to substance abuse or mental ailments like depression and anxiety. Dahmer had the worst of it all, leading him to his horrific actions, as he had stifled them for so long that he had lost all remorse. Number 3. When he explained how he had no real meaning of life, and called his life story sick and depressing. I couldn't find any meaning for my life when I was out there. I'm sure as hell not gonna find it here. This is the grand finale of a life poorly spent, and the end result is just overwhelmingly depressing. It's just a sick, pathetic, wretched, miserable life story. How it can help anyone, I've no idea. Dahmer's father published a book titled A Father's Story in 1994, describing how it felt to be Jeffrey's father. He explained in said book how he was negligent and contemplated reasons on why his son had turned out the way he did. Lionel Dahmer often blamed himself for the severe flaws of his son, Jeffrey. Number 2. His reaction to his inability to continue doing what he has done. It's just like a big chunk of me is being ripped out and I'm not quite whole. I don't think I'm over-dramatizing it, and I'm certainly deserving of it, but the way I feel now, it's just like you're talking to someone who is terminally ill and facing execution. Execution would be preferable to what I am facing. I just feel like imploding upon myself, you know? I just want to go somewhere and disappear. Dahmer has said in previous interviews how the executions were never enough. He would perform one and say, maybe the next one will do it, maybe the one after that, and he would inevitably just keep going. Number 1. His final quote ever. He is reported as saying this: I don't care if I live or perish. Go ahead and remove me. Jeffrey Dahmer said this as his last words, but he didn't pass away from the execution penalty. He was actually hit by a fellow inmate and passed away while in prison. The harrowing life of Jeffrey Dahmer is sure to be kept in the history books for a long time, and his case should be an example of how everyone can be more careful with strangers, raising their kids, and reporting crimes to the authorities when you can. What's the worst thing you can think of? This guy's probably done it and then said he didn't. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 chilling things John Wayne Gacy has said. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get the clown makeup. Also, side note, I appreciate all of our subscribers. Thank you very much.
Everybody from the neighborhood knew John Gacy.
I was clowning and appearing in at least 10, 15 parades.
Number 10. When he said that some of the identifications of his victims were wrong. I'm not interested in what the public thinks. My fight is in the courts. And while I have been fighting with the appeal, it has been an uphill battle because I am an unpopular cause. Too much public pressure, too much politics. To give me a hearing so that I can prove that the state withheld evidence favorable to me, that the identifications of some of the victims was wrong, and that my attorney was more concerned about book rights and how sensationally more the case could get, the higher the value of the book. Gacy alleges that his attorney only took his defense because he wanted the information about Gacy so that he could put it in a book. He is asking here for another hearing for his case, perhaps to reduce his sentence to something lighter. Gacy's sentence ended up in execution, as he was sentenced to capital punishment for his crimes. Gacy became a Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and in this capacity he met the wife of Jimmy Carter, Rosalind. There's a famous photo of Gacy with Carter, which she signed to John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter, Chicago, Vronsky. Someone said that this was a big part of the Democratic Party machine at the time, and Gacy was heavily involved, even acting as a marshal in a Polish parade. Number 9, when he said Jeffrey Dahmer was more insane than him. If Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the legal test for insanity, God help the one that does meet it. It has to really be something. If Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet it, then nobody does. And for me, it's a psychological ploy to use. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't end up being legally insane. The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer's insanity defense was rejected is because the jury did not see clear and convincing evidence of how Jeffrey Dahmer's mental condition caused him to commit the crimes without understanding the wrongness of his actions. If you are wondering if Gacy himself met the legal test for insanity, here's a quote directly from an official law review from West Virginia University in 1984. Given the psychiatric evaluation of Gacy, neither a criminal sentence nor a program of treatment for a mentally disordered offender may be adequate or appropriate. The case suggests the need to consider the possibility of permanent isolation and incapacitation of dangerous persons who are not treatable nor rehabilitatable, nor properly subject to execution. In addition to becoming one of Netflix's most popular shows of the year with 500 million hours watched already, Dahmer is actually so popular that it's making an entirely separate serial executioner rise up Netflix's top 10 list. That would be the true crime docuseries Conversations with a Terminator, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, which is a 3-episode, 3-hour documentary that features details of Gacy's slaughters and interviews with the man himself. Number 8, when he was trying to convince the court that he was truly insane or had no knowledge of the crimes committed. No, I don't think that's possible. After 14 years under truth serum, had I committed the crime, I would have known it. There's got to be something that would click in my mind. I've had photos of 21 of the victims, and I've looked at them all over the years here, and I've never recognized any one of them.
The thing of it is, we took it a step further. We went into their backgrounds. I wanted to know where they were at, what schools they attended, who they hung out with, and what kind of activities they were into. And that's what we dug up on each one of the victims. But still, there is no association. None of them never worked for me. None of them, they never went to any places that I ever hung around, because I didn't hang around that many places unless you were involved in politics.
He's lying through his teeth right here. He wants the court to believe that he didn't recognize the victims at all, and thus he couldn't have committed the crimes, or that he was insane for not being able to remember that he committed the slaughters. Whatever he tried here, it failed for him, as we all know. John Wayne Gacy is obsessively fond of defending his innocence, which is imaginary. On March 12, 1980, he was convicted in Chicago of ending the lives of 33 guys. The removals took place between 1972 and 1978, when he was caught and arrested. No one else in America has ever been convicted of ending so many people. 27 of the bodies were buried in a crawl space beneath the house where Gacy lived, in a neighborhood out by O'Hare Airport. Number 7, when he created a conspiracy against the state of Illinois. If you're talking about the Summerdale house and the bodies found there, we feel that some of them passed of substance overdose, then were buried alive. Trouble is, the state never did toxicology on the victims, as they wouldn't fit their theory that they were all strangled. Even Dr. Stein says that the 13 passed of suffocation and 10 were left undetermined, which leads me to believe that they were not terminated the way the state wants you to believe. The state of Illinois had a running theory that Gacy strangled all of his victims, which Gacy denied vehemently. I'm not sure if he's denying the cause of execution for the 10 other victims to reduce his sentence or to say he's innocent. If you know, then let us know in the comments below. The case of John Wayne Gacy is particularly valuable in that it presents an opportunity to examine the functioning of the insanity defense in a trial where no other legal issues were before the jury. The defendant's confessions to police and their admission at trial, along with the location of the remains of victims, some located with the assistance of the defendant, effectively eliminated the alternative plea of not guilty. Number 6, when he said the public was brainwashed. Keep in mind, the public has been brainwashed, and nearly 80% of what is known about me is fantasy and self-serving theories of the state. But overall, I am an embarrassment of the justice system, because if I am right, then they are wrong, and the butchers are still out there. For political reasons, it would be better that I drop out of life. Then they could all say what a great job they've done, and nobody else would be pushing for the truth to come out.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Another conspiracy from Mr. Gacy. At this point, he might really be insane, but it's better that he wasn't sentenced for insanity because this guy really did some awful things. When asked about his trial during an interview later, he dived deeper into the conspiracy. Okay, you sold a car to your employee Michael Rossi that belonged to one of the victims, John Psych. Yet you deny this, said the interviewer. Gacy replied, "That's true. This came out at trial too. Yet it's not true, and even the state knew this and covered it up." The Bureau of Scientific Services in Maywood, Illinois on March 27, 1979, a year before the trial. This report showed that the handwriting samples were taken from me, from John Psych, the victim, and from Michael Rossi, and they were compared to the motor vehicle title R1209194 and the other questionable vehicle transfer papers. The result of the findings was that all the names were forged by Michael Rossi, as it was all done in his handwriting. Yet at trial, even knowing this, the state told the jury that John Wayne Gacy did this. My defense attorney never objected to it because they thought it didn't harm my case. Number 5. When he explained why he marked the spot in the garage where some of the bodies were hidden. Yes, I marked the spot in the garage. When I was back at the house on December 22nd, they had asked me to. With all the rebuilding of the garage, which was the last area of concrete, in the last area where the concrete was poured, and they handed me an orange spray can and I put an X. That's it. An X over the spot in the corner of the garage where I thought the last area was poured. Now all of a sudden, Kunkel claims that I not only drew an X, but I put no on top of it, where the head was, and made that X look like it was a stick figure. And that's not true. Gacy buried Butkovich's body under his garage. He then took the teen's car and left it in a parking lot with Butkovich's keys and wallet sitting out in the front seat. Butkovich's parents were convinced that Gacy was involved in the boy's disappearance and called police at least once a week for nearly 2 years, urging them to investigate Gacy. Had the police followed the Butkovich's instructions, the lives of at least 30 other young men and teenage boys could have been spared. Unfortunately for the victims, the cops hadn't put in any effort in finding the bodies. Number 4, when he talked about whether or not there was an odor in the Somerville house. This one's kinda gross. There was no smell. Over the years, other than when it rained, the musty odor was present. People were in and out of that house daily for years, and other than when it rained, there was no odor, and certainly not like what some of the books said. That's all fantasy. If that odor was there, somebody would have noticed it sooner.
29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic, dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another.
When his second wife, Carol, whom he divorced in 1975, would complain about the smell emanating from beneath their home, he would chalk it up to some sewage issue, enlisting workers at his contracting company to spread hundreds of pounds of lime in the crawl space in an effort to conceal the stench. The stench was actually one of the main reasons he was caught, because his neighbors kept complaining about it. Number 3, when he explained that other people had keys to his rental house. Yes, that's true, but the house wasn't a home. Like what you go to a home to every night. The Summerdale house is rented to PDM contractors. There was 12 keys out to it, but that was never allowed to come out at the trial, as it would put doubt in the state's theory. They didn't want anybody to know that people had keys to the house. Plus the fact that I wasn't always at the house, so others used it just as much. And again, that wasn't brought out at the trial as it didn't fit the state's theory of the case that I committed all the crimes. If 11 people had access to the home, how come no one else complained about the smell? It's actually very strange in my opinion. Number 2, when he denied he ever confessed. That is what has been said in the media and at the trial. To this day, nobody has produced one. There's no written confession. There's no tape recorded confession. There's no police stenographer typed confession. It was in my appeal, and the court refused to look at it, and the state refused to answer it. If they had nothing to hide, I can't understand why they can't produce one. It's interesting that he says he never confessed when on December 22nd, 1978, John Wayne Gacy confessed to police to ending over 24 young men and burying their bodies under his suburban Chicago home. Maybe he was just joking when he confessed. Number 1, when he implied that he didn't work alone. It wasn't in the state's best interest to let the jury know. They said it would raise doubt that John Gacy acted alone. The defense attorneys didn't bring it out because it didn't go along with their insanity defense, showing others were involved. A lot came to light in John Wayne Gacy's trial. The garage where he kept the bodies of the victims, the implication of another person being involved, so much to follow and keep track of that it kind of gets convoluted. Theodore Robert Bundy was a terrible man, a lunatic even. Today, come with me as we explore Ted Bundy and his psyche. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 chilling things that Ted Bundy has said. Press on the subscribe button and ring that bell too so you get notified every time we upload a new video. Anyways, let's look into the past. Number 10, I haven't blocked out the past. I wouldn't trade the person I am or what I've done or the people I've known for anything, so I do think about it. And at times, it's a rather mellow trip to lay back and remember. Ted Bundy is notoriously a ruthless man. Even in this quote, he seems to be thinking fondly about his executions. One of the biggest ways to identify someone as having sociopathic tendencies is to determine their relationship to feelings and emotions. When Bundy says it's a rather mellow trip to lay back and remember, he isn't talking about some trip to Florence or something. He's talking about the ecstatic feeling when he committed the executions. He feels nothing but mellow for the crimes he's committed. This is reinforced in number 9. I don't feel guilty for anything. I feel sorry for people who feel guilt. This proves that Ted Bundy is remorseless. A person who is remorseless doesn't feel any guilt. If you're remorseless, you don't feel bad at all, even if you've done something terrible. When someone is remorseless, that person has no feeling of pity for people who have been hurt. The night before his execution, Bundy confessed to 30 of his crimes, but the true total remains unknown. Published estimates have run as high as 100 or more, and Bundy occasionally made cryptic comments to encourage that speculation. He told Ainsworth in 1980 that for every execution publicized, there could be one that was not. When FBI agents proposed a total tally of 36, Bundy responded, "Add one digit to that, and you'll have it." It seemed like Bundy had no care for anything, turning the entire tragedy into a game for the FBI and the public. Both have called him evil before. He didn't believe he was. At number 8, Ted Bundy said this: "Society wants to believe it can identify evil people, or bad or harmful people. But it's not practical. There are no stereotypes." This quote is like a twisted and malformed version of the classic idiom, "The world isn't black or white." When Bundy says there are no stereotypes, he is trying to shame the media. The public who scorns him, detests his very existence. He shames the articles depicting him as the devil or as an evil person. Think about that for a moment. Ted Bundy, infamous executioner, bringer of self-righteous despair, feels so little for his actions that he is shaming the people who identify him as evil. Another interesting facet of this quote is him saying, "It's not practical." Of course, any common sociopath doesn't feel guilt or remorse. Instead, they think in practicality. It's them or me. At number 7, what's one less person on the face of the earth anyways? With this quote, it's easy to derive what Bundy thought about what he was doing. In the United States, between the years 1974 and 1978, 16,131,855 people were recorded as born. Those years are significant, as those are the years Bundy was active. He knew how many people were born every day. He knew they had ties to families and friends. He just didn't care. In the grand scheme of things, to him, it was just one life out of billions. Millions of people pass away each year, each month, each day. What's one more? In a vast universe, millions of galaxies and systems and stars and planets, what could the effect of one man with a knife produce? Why would it matter? To him, it doesn't matter. At number 6, execution is not just a crime of lust or violence. It becomes possession. They are part of you. The victim becomes a part of you, and you two are forever one. And the grounds where you remove them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them. This explanation is especially interesting as it might have revealed something about the thought processes of other criminals of the same caliber. Many criminals are arrested or found at the scene of the crime or around it. It seems Bundy was right about that. It's a sacred place, the place where you permanently implemented someone into your story. At number 5, those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media. in particular adult media violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We're your sons, and we are your husbands, and we grew up in regular families. And adult media can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. Interestingly, Bundy actually blames adulterated content for how he turned out, though I suppose it makes sense why he blamed that instead of himself. After all, to him, it could never be himself. Addiction to adult content has been rising in recent times, and nowadays there are resources to help quell the urges. However, back in the 60s and 70s, it was most likely very stigmatized by society. At number 4, when you feel the last bit of breath leaving their body, you're looking into their eyes. A person in that situation is God. Bundy made it clear how intimate he feels with the victim before, after, and during his execution of them. Narcissistic personality disorder, the proper term for some who have a God complex, is a rare mental disorder characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, entitlement, a deep need for admiration, and an alarming lack of empathy for other people. Executioners like Bundy see themselves as better than everyone else, thinking of themselves as gods amongst men, worthy of taking out anyone who opposes them. These are the most dangerous people in the world, the ones that believe they run it. At number 3, I don't think anybody doubts whether I've done some bad things. The question is what, of course, and how, and maybe even most importantly, why? It seems Bundy contradicts his previous quote, the one where he says society wants to believe it can identify evil people or bad or harmful people, but it's not practical. He outright admits to have done bad things, which raises more questions than answers. He again toys with the interviewer, asking questions to the interviewer from a third-person perspective of himself. These really are the most important questions, but Bundy has no real intention of answering them in this interview. Aside from that, perhaps Bundy believes that society has no right to call individuals bad people or evil, and it is left up to the individual to decide that for themselves. Either way, Bundy admits to doing bad things. At number 2, I understand now a lot of stuff about myself that I didn't understand then. It makes me realize what was going on. The senselessness of it appalls me, although I'm sure not so much as those who were so close to it. This quote is confusing for several reasons. He states how the senselessness of it all appalled him, but does that mean he is remorseful and regretting of his actions? Or is he referring to how convoluted his executions were, wishing he'd been cleaner with them? I interpret this as him noticing how close to the electric chair he truly is, wishing he had been a better and more efficient criminal. I believe Bundy wanted to do more with his life and less in others. At number 1. After his last meal, steak and eggs, Bundy was sent to the parish chamber on the morning of January 24th, 1989. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." After that, he was executed via the electric chair. Jim Coleman was Bundy's defense attorney, and Fred Lawrence was his minister. They had both spent a considerable amount of time with Ted Bundy. The story of Ted Bundy is one of tragedy and insanity, one that I hope isn't recreated in the future. Not many people have evaded capture by the United States, but one man stands above the rest as their most wanted. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 chilling truths about America's most wanted man. Subscribe to Crime Time and ring that bell for a notification whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get a wanted poster. At number 10, who he is. Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez, also known as El Gato, is wanted for his alleged involvement in the interstate stalking and conspiracy to commit execution for hire of a 43-year-old male victim on May 22nd, 2013 in Southlake, Texas. A federal arrest warrant for these charges was issued on June 20th, 2018. Villarreal Hernandez allegedly holds an active leadership position in the Beltran Leyva substance trafficking organization within the region of San Pedro Garza Garcia, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. The man was born in Mexico, has a stout build, and his alias El Gato translates to the cat. Villarreal Hernandez was the 524th fugitive to be placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. At number 9, his background. Villarreal Hernandez was born in Mexico on January 16, 1978. He was a leader of the Beltran Leyva cartel. A few years prior to 2013, Villarreal Hernandez's father was executed by the Gulf Cartel, a rival cartel to the Beltran Leyva, with whom they had an ongoing feud. Guerrero, who was a lawyer, was reportedly associated with the Gulf Cartel and represented the Gulf Cartel leader Osiel Cardenas Guillen. Villarreal Hernandez blamed Guerrero personally for the execution of his father and sought revenge. At number 8, his conspiracy. Villarreal Hernandez hired a crew to assassinate Guerrero. By May 2013, Guerrero was living in Southlake, Texas, and was now a US informant who was cooperating with law enforcement. Because of this, he was allowed to live legally in the United States. Villarreal Hernandez sent a crew from Mexico to track and locate Guerrero. He was eventually located and found to be living in South Lake. At number 7, the execution. On the evening of May 22nd, 2013, 2 hitmen working for Villarreal Hernandez, known only as Clorox and Captain, tracked Guerrero and his wife in their vehicle. As they drove to South Lake Town Square around 6:47 p.m., Guerrero climbed into the front passenger seat of his burgundy Range Rover, while his wife placed bags into the back of the vehicle. The 2 assassins, driving a white Toyota Sequoia, pulled up behind them. The passenger exited the vehicle wearing a hoodie and a bandana and fired multiple rounds from a handgun at Guerrero. Guerrero was shot in his side and back before slumping motionless against the front seats. The shooter returned to the car and the assassins escaped. Guerrero was rushed to a local hospital where he was pronounced deceased. His wife escaped the shooting unharmed. At number 6, the investigation. 3 men who were connected to the assassination plot have since been arrested for their involvement in the crime. The 2 assassins and Villarreal Hernandez remain at large. According to witness testimony, Guerrero's sister took revenge against Villarreal Hernandez by having one of his relatives beheaded. He was then sent a video of the severed head. Villarreal Hernandez is still in hiding and is wanted by the FBI for interstate stalking and conspiracy to commit execution for hire. He is believed to be hiding in Mexico. At number 5, his reward. The United States Department of State's Transnational Organized Crime Rewards Program is offering a reward of up to $1 million for information leading directly to the arrest of Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez. The $1 million reward makes Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez one of the most rewarding wanted criminals to capture on the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list. Offering rewards to catch criminals may, in rare instances, motivate people to come forward with a tip. However, few people actually claim reward, and there's little evidence that they actually work. Regardless of this, rewards may reach up to $5 million. At number 4, his Twitter? I'm not sure if this is actually Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez or if it's a spoof or a parody or something, but it's worth looking into. On January 9th, 2021, an account called Jose Villarreal responded to a post by the FBI. The FBI tweeted this on December 30th, 2020. Help the #FBI find Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez, who is wanted for allegedly directing his associates to track and execute a man in Southlake, Texas in 2013. And Jose Villarreal responded with this: "The thing is, you'll never get to me. I'm always 2 steps ahead of you," which is his only tweet to date. His bio also reads Mexican fugitive and drug cartel boss. Added to the FBI 10 most wanted fugitives list on October 13th, 2020. He seems like a confident guy. At number 3, his net worth. Although it is just an estimate and it is warned that the amount may vary, a website estimates that Jose Villarreal's net worth could total up to $7.67 million. That's pretty crazy. I do suppose he was a cartel boss and sold substances for a lot of money. That amount of money could help him escape the FBI for a long time. It's very likely he has a lot of his money in cash or in untraceable prepaid Visa cards. With that much money, Jose Villarreal can afford to purchase a plane ticket every day for 63 years. That'll keep him out of the FBI's view. At number 2, his possible sentence. Apparently, everyone who conspires with anyone to commit execution or to cause another person to be executed, whether in Canada or not, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to a maximum term of imprisonment for life. So, if he is caught, Jose Villarreal would most likely be put into a maximum security prison for life. If he is caught in Mexico or another country, it is likely he will be extradited back to the United States because that's where he committed the crime originally. At number 1, what he looks like. Jose Villarreal is a 5 foot 4 inches tall, 44-year-old Mexican man. He's around 165 pounds as well and has brown eyes with black hair. If you think you see the man anywhere, it's best to stay a bit away, as authorities have no way to tell if the man is armed and dangerous. If you do see him, however, make sure to send an anonymous tip to the FBI or your local authorities and collect that reward money. Italian mobsters, bank robbers, and criminals. This isn't a video you want to miss. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 famous Alcatraz inmates they hid from you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, welcome to Alcatraz. Number 10, John and Clarence Anglin. These 2 convicts are brothers, so I put them both in the same spot. The 2 were born into a family of 13 kids, but were inseparable together. The brothers began robbing banks and other establishments as a team in the early 1950s, usually targeting businesses that were closed to ensure that no one got injured. They claimed that they used a weapon only once during a bank heist, a toy gun. In 1958, John, Clarence, and Alfred Anglin robbed the Columbia Savings Bank building in Columbia, Alabama. all received 35-year sentences, which they served at Florida State Prison, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, and then Atlanta Penitentiary. After repeated attempts to escape from the Atlanta facility, John and Clarence were transferred to Alcatraz. The brothers were also a part of the world-famous escape from Alcatraz, though no one knows if it was successful or not. Number 9, Herbert Allen Farmer. Herbert, along with his wife, provided a safe house for underworld fugitives from the mid-1920s to 1933. In the 1920s, his farm in southwest Missouri was a safe harbor for bank robbers and other criminals of the Cookson Hills region, such as Harvey Bailey, Frank Nash, Wilbur Underhill, Big Bob Brady, and the Holden Keating Gang. In the public enemy era, as organized crime strengthened and expanded in the United States, the farm became part of a network of safe houses for gangsters along the Midwest crime corridor. On the 16th of 1933, Herbert and Esther Farmer were involved in the plan which set into motion the Kansas City Massacre, a pivotal event in Depression-era crime. With 5 others, they were convicted of conspiracy to free a federal prisoner, Frank Nash, in January 1935. He received the maximum fine for his actions and was sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, later being transferred to Alcatraz. Number 8, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, also known as Bumpy. Johnson was an associate of Madame Stephanie St. Clair, a queen at a certain game called Numbers, which is really just an illegal lottery. He became her principal lieutenant in the 1930s before they both started a fight with the New York mob boss Dutch Schultz. The fight resulted in 40 people executed and several kidnapped. Eventually, the fight was over and Johnson's side lost. In 1952, Johnson's activities were reported in the Celebrity People section of Jet magazine. That same year, Johnson was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a substance conspiracy conviction. 2 years later, Jet magazine reported in its crime section that Johnson began his sentence after losing an appeal. He served the majority of that sentence at Alcatraz Prison in San Francisco Bay, California, as inmate number 1117. Number 7, Alvin Creepy Karpis. Karpis was born in Montreal, Quebec, but raised in Kansas. He began his life of crime at the age of only 10 years old. At that age, he ran around with gamblers and bootleggers. After moving to Kansas City, Missouri, he was caught stealing a car and sent back to the reformatory. Transferred to the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, he met Fred Barker, who was in prison for bank burglary. Barker was one of the notorious members of the Bloody Barkers, as the newspapers of the time called them. The Barker-Karpis gang became one of the most formidable criminal gangs of the 1930s. They did not hesitate to execute anyone who got in their way, even innocent bystanders. On December 19, 1931, Karpis and Fred Barker executed Sheriff C. Roy Kelly, who was investigating the robbery of a store in West Plains, Missouri. The gang, including Ma Barker and her paramour, Arthur Dunlop, fled to St. Paul, Minnesota. Karpis has been described as the leader or brains of the gang. Gang members Fred Hunter said Karpis was super smart and he was reported to have a photographic memory. The capture of Karpis essentially ended the age of big-name Depression-era criminals. Karpis was incarcerated at the then recently constructed Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary from August 1936 to April 1962. He served the longest sentence ever at Alcatraz, 26 years. Number 6, Morton Sobel. Morton Sobel was an American engineer and Soviet spy during and after WW2. He was charged as part of a conspiracy which included Julius Rosenberg and his wife. Sobel worked on military and government contracts with General Electric and Reeves Instrument Corporation in the 1940s, including during WW2. Sobel was tried and convicted of espionage in 1951 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to NKGB agent Alexander Feklisov, Sobel was recruited as a spy in the summer of 1944 during WW2 when the Soviet Union had become an ally of the United States. Sobel was deferred from active military service because he was a top specialist in his field. When I asked him if he could microfilm his own documents, he replied it was not a problem since he knew photography quite well. At our next meeting, I brought him a camera with the necessary accessories and a small stock of film. Sobel was initially sent to Alcatraz, but was transferred to Lewisburg Penitentiary when that prison closed in 1963. Number 5, Al Scarface Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known by the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was an Italian-American organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the massacre. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran. Number 4, Robert Stroud. Robert Franklin Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, was a convicted executioner, American federal prisoner, and author who has been cited as one of the most notorious criminals in the United States. During his time at Leavenworth Penitentiary, he reared and sold birds and became a respected ornithologist. From 1942 to 1959, he was incarcerated at Alcatraz, where regulations did not allow him to keep birds. Stroud was never released from the federal prison system. He was imprisoned from 1909 to his passing in 1963. Stroud gained a reputation for being a dangerous inmate. He often started fights with fellow inmates and prison staff. This escalated in 1916, where he stabbed a prison guard until his demise. Number 3, Sam Shockley. Shockley presented an IQ of just 68, giving him a mental age of 10 years and 10 months. After robbing a man for his car, robbing a bank, and kidnapping 2 employees, he was sent to Leavenworth. He suffered episodes of hallucinations and demonstrated serious emotional instability and was incapable of coping with the normal prison environment, presenting a risk to himself and others. Rather than transferring him to the medical center for federal prisoners at Springfield, Missouri, officials at Leavenworth sent him to Alcatraz on September 23, 1938, where it was believed the strict routine would better manage him. Shockley was placed for 3 years in the D-block isolation section, for most of the time in the hole or dungeon, the darkened, stripped-in cells on the ground level where he spent most of his time in darkness. At night, he was allowed a blanket and a mattress. During the day, he was sitting and lying on the cold concrete. His condition deteriorated. He displayed classic schizophrenic symptoms, delusions, auditory hallucinations, and disorientation. His IQ dropped to 54, indicating a mental age of 8. Number 2, George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Barnes, better known as his pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly, was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his very favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. He is best known for the kidnapping of oil tycoon and businessman Charles F. Urschel in July 1933, from which he and his gang collected a $200,000 ransom. Urschel had collected and left considerable evidence that assisted the subsequent FBI investigation, which eventually led to Kelly's arrest in Memphis, Tennessee on September 26, 1933. His crimes also included bootlegging and armed robbery. Machine Gun Kelly spent his remaining 21 years in prison. During his time at Alcatraz, he got the nickname Pop Gun Kelly. According to fellow inmate Dale Stamphill, the nickname originated because he told big fish stories. The cons called him Pop Gun Kelly, after cork guns that were popular with kids. The guys didn't take him seriously. This may have stemmed from the fact that, in addition to his exaggerated tall tales, Kelly was a model prisoner and did not act like the brutal gangster his wife, the media, and FBI made him out to be. Number 1, Frank Morris. Frank Morris was born in Washington, D.C. His parents abandoned him when he was 11, so he spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes, an orphan. He was convicted of his first criminal offense at 13, and by his late teens had been arrested for crimes ranging from substance possession to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail serving lunch to prisoners. Later, he was arrested for grand larceny in Miami Beach, car theft, and armed robbery. Morris reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence, as measured by his IQ testing 133. He served time in Florida and Georgia, then escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 10, 1960, as inmate number AZ-1441. The crew used a raft made of raincoats and fake heads they'd sculpted during their time there to trick the guards. Alcatraz is a scary place. The prison, also known as The Rock, was home to many inmates before it was shut down. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 inmates who were too evil for Alcatraz prison. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get into it. Number 10, Volney Curly Davis. Davis was born in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and was seemingly raised to be a bad boy. At the age of just 17, Davis was arrested for the first time in 1919 for stealing a pair of shoes. The grand larcenist was an early member of the Minnesota-based Central Park gang during the 20s, where he met the Barker gang and committed his first major robbery when he and an associate burglarized St. John's Hospital in Brooklyn Park. I'm not sure of the practicality of robbing a hospital instead of a bank, but to each their own, I guess. The night watchman of the hospital was executed during the robbery, and Davis was sentenced to life imprisonment for the execution. Curly escaped prison at McAllister during a mass escape and was recaptured, then escaped again before being sent to Alcatraz. Number 9. Al Scarface Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known by the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was an Italian-American organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the tragedy. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran, head of the Northside Gang, and the motivation for the plan may have been the fact that some expensive beverage, illegally imported from Canada via the Detroit River, had been hijacked while it was being transported to Cook County, Illinois. On March 27, 1929, Capone was arrested by FBI agents as he left a Chicago courtroom after testifying to a grand jury that was investigating violations of federal prohibition laws. He was charged with contempt of court for feigning illness to avoid an earlier appearance. Number 8. James Whitey Bulger. James Joseph Bulger Jr. was an American organized crime boss who led the Winter Hill Gang in the Winter Hill neighborhood of Somerville, Massachusetts, a city directly northwest of Boston. In 1956, Bulger served his first term in federal prison at Atlanta Penitentiary for armed robbery and truck hijack. In 1959, Bulger was briefly transferred to maximum security at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in California. Later in his sentence, he was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary and, in 1963, to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. On December 23, 1994, Bulger fled the Boston area and went into hiding after his former FBI handler, John Connolly, tipped him off about a pending RICO indictment against him. Bulger remained at large for 16 years. After his 2011 arrest, federal prosecutors tried Bulger for 19 executions based on grand jury testimony from Kevin Weeks and other former criminal associates. Number 7. Arthur Doc Barker. Arthur R. Barker was an American criminal and member of the Barker Karpus gang founded by his brother Fred Barker and Alvin Karpus. Arthur Barker was known as the hitman of the gang. His brother and Karpus would plan the attacks, and all Arthur did was execute them. He was arrested and convicted of kidnapping in 1936 and was executed while trying to escape Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Barker is described by one writer as a dimwit and a drunk, who was not much more than a brutal thug. However, fellow Alcatraz inmate Henry Young said of him that he was determined and ruthless, and that once he started on anything, nothing can stop him but passing. Number 6. Basil the Owl Banghart. Basil Hugh Banghart Jr. was an American criminal, burglar, and prison escape artist. Although a successful stick-up artist during the 1920s and early 1930s, he is best remembered for his involvement in the hoax kidnapping of Chicago mobster Jake the Barber Factor, a crime for which Roger Toohey and he were eventually proven innocent after nearly 20 years in prison. After years of unsuccessful appeals, Banghart and Toohey escaped Joliet with Edward Durlack, Martlick Nelson, William Stewart, St. Clair McInerney, and James O'Connor on October 9, 1942. The convicts were given even longer jail sentences for their escape, and on January 2, 1943, Banghart was returned to Stateville, where he was placed in solitary confinement. He was then transferred with an escort of 18 federal marshals to Alcatraz. Number 5. Harvey Bailey, aka the Dean of American Bank Robbers. Born in West Virginia, Bailey robbed his first bank around the time of 1921 and his last in Kingfisher, Oklahoma on September 9, 1933. He was incarcerated in Dallas on July 8, 1932 until he escaped on June 1, 1933 during a breakout in which the warden was kidnapped and used as a human shield. He was recaptured and found guilty of complicity in the Urschel kidnapping and was sentenced to life in prison on October 7, 1933. Originally sent to Leavenworth, he was transferred to Alcatraz on September 1, 1934. He was returned to Leavenworth in 1946 and transferred in 1960 to Seagoville Federal Correctional Institution in Texas, where he remained until he was released on March 30, 1964. While active, Harvey Bailey was one of the most successful bank robbers during the 20s and collected over $1 million in stolen funds. Number 4. Theodore Ted Cole. On December 16, 1937, a dense fog swept through the San Francisco Bay, impeding marine traffic and reducing visibility to near zero on Alcatraz Island. Cole and Rowe, both convicted bank robbers in Oklahoma, had been caught during earlier independent escape attempts from that state's McAllister prison. As escape risks, they were both incarcerated in high-security Leavenworth prison, then transferred to higher-security Alcatraz in 1936. They were given jobs working in the prison's mash shop, a facility at the northernmost point of the island. Cole and Rowe were working in the mash shop. A routine head count at 1 p.m. showed all prisoners accounted for. At the next count at 1:30 p.m., the two men were gone. 2 iron bars and 3 heavy glass panes of a window in the shop had a hole 22 centimeters high and 46 centimeters long. Once through the window, they slipped down to the gate of a high wire fence, concealed by the fog. With a wrench taken from the tire shop, they forced the gate lock and dropped 20 feet to a beach. Their trail vanished at that point. Number 3. Meyer Mickey Cohen. During Prohibition, Cohen moved to Chicago and became involved in organized crime, working as an enforcer for the Chicago outfit, where he briefly met Al Capone. During this period, Cohen was arrested for his role in the executions of several gangsters in a card game. In 1939, Cohen arrived in Los Angeles to work under Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. During their association, Cohen helped set up the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and ran its sportsbook operation. In 1957, Time magazine wrote a brief article about Cohen's meeting with evangelist Billy Graham. Cohen said, "I am very high on the Christian way of life." Billy came up and before we had food, he said, "What do you call it? That thing they say before food? Grace? Yeah, grace." Then we talked a lot about Christianity and stuff. Allegedly, when Cohen did not change his lifestyle, he was confronted by Christian acquaintances. His response was this: Christian football players, Christian cowboys, Christian politicians, why not a Christian gangster? Cohen was convicted of tax evasion and sent to Alcatraz. Number 2, James C. Lucas, aka Texas bank robber. Lucas was originally sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for robbing First National Bank in Albany, Texas, in violation of the Dyer Act, interstate trafficking of stolen vehicles. He arrived in Alcatraz in January 1935 from the Texas State Prison and was known there as James Texas Bank Robber Lucas. James Lucas, along with 2 other inmates, were involved in an escape attempt in the spring of 1938. They enacted their escape plan on May 23, 1938 in the prison's mat shop, where they assaulted custodial officer Royal Clyde with hammer blows to his head. They proceeded to the roof where armed guard Harold Stites shot both Franklin and Limerick, although Lucas wasn't shot. Other guards arrived at the scene. Franklin, Limerick, and Lucas were cornered and surrendered to the guards. Number 1. George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Barnes, better known by his pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly, was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. He is best known for the kidnapping of oil tycoon and businessman Charles F. Urschel in July 1933, from which he and his gang collected a $200,000 ransom. Urschel had collected and left considerable evidence that assisted the subsequent FBI investigation, which eventually led to Kelly's arrest in Memphis, Tennessee on September 26, 1933. His crimes also included bootlegging and armed robbery. The kidnapping of Urschel and the 2 trials that resulted were historic in several ways. They were the first federal criminal trials in the United States in which film cameras were allowed, the first kidnapping trials after the passing of the Lindbergh Law, which made kidnapping a federal crime, the first major case solved by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and the first prosecution in which defendants were transported by airplane. Machine Gun Kelly spent his remaining 21 years in prison. Maybe someday I'll find my Bonnie. Or not. Probably not. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 chilling things you didn't know about Bonnie and Clyde. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's prepare for trouble and make it double!
Prepare for trouble!
Make it double!
Number 10. Bonnie wrote poetry. Okay, this doesn't sound very chilling, but her poetry was actually kinda creepy.
What you writing?
Writing a poem about us.
Yeah? Let me hear it. Come on.
Okay, just let me finish this one.
During her school days, Bonnie excelled at creative writing and writing poetry. While she was imprisoned in 1932 after a failed hardware store robbery, she penned a collection of 10 different poems that she entitled Poetry from Life's Other Side, which included The Story of Self-Hurt Sal, a poem about an innocent country girl lured by her boyfriend into a life of crime. Sound familiar?
You've heard the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde.
You think if I sent that into newspapers that print it, I'm gonna do it.
2 weeks before her passing, Bonnie gave a strangely accurate poem about the future of her life to her mother entitled The Trail's End, that finished with the verse, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury 'em side by side. To a few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's termination for Bonnie and Clyde." That slaps, by the way. That's lyrics right there.
You know what you done there? You told my story. You told my whole story right there. One time I told you I was gonna make you somebody, that's what you done for me. You made me somebody they gonna remember.
At the end of each point, I'll be giving you guys some stanzas from her poem. Number 9, Bonnie was wearing a ring before her passing, but it wasn't from Clyde. 6 days before turning 16, Bonnie married high school classmate Roy Thornton. The marriage fell apart very quickly, within months, and Bonnie never again saw her husband after he was imprisoned for robbery in 1929. It seems like Bonnie had a thing for bad boys. Soon after, Bonnie met Clyde, and although the pair fell in love, she never divorced Thornton. On the day Bonnie and Clyde were removed from the world in 1934, she was still wearing Thornton's wedding ring and actually had a tattoo on the inside of her right thigh, with two interconnected hearts labeled Bonnie and Roy. Clyde really got the short end of the stick there. No tattoo, no ring. Dang. The first stanza is this. You've read the story of Jesse James, of how he crossed the Great Divide. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Bonnie and Clyde are the Barrow Gang. I'm sure you all have read. How they rob and steal, and those who squeal are usually found filled with lead. Number 8, Clyde was rejected from the US Navy. As a teenager, Clyde attempted to enlist in the US Navy, but lingering effects from a serious boyhood illness, possibly malaria or yellow fever, resulted in his medical rejection. It was a hard blow for Clyde, who had already tattooed USN on his left arm. This really is a testament to tattoos. You gotta make sure it's worth it when you get a tattoo. Clyde really should have waited until his acceptance letter arrived for him to get that. Clyde was indeed very pro-Navy and was actually photographed in a sailor suit a couple times. It definitely wasn't a real sailor suit because, you know. The minimum age for enlistment in the US Navy jumped back and forth between 17 and 18 years old. But by the time his birthday rolled around in March of 1926, the enlistment age was 17. By the end of that year, Clyde had been arrested for stealing a car, and even though charges were eventually dropped, this police record may have been enough to prevent him from enlisting if he hadn't failed the physical. Here's the next stanza. There's lots of untruths to these write-ups. They're not as ruthless as that. Their nature is raw. They hate all the law, the stool pigeons, spotters, and rats. They call them cold-blooded butchers. They say they are heartless and mean. But I say this with pride that I once knew Clyde when he was honest and upright and clean. Number 7. Speaking of that car he stole, the notorious criminal Clyde Champion Barrow was first arrested in 1926 for automobile theft after failing to return a car he had rented in Dallas to visit an estranged high school girlfriend. The rental car agency dropped the charges, but the incident remained on Clyde's arrest record. Just 3 weeks later, he was arrested again alongside his older brother, Ivan Buck Barrow, for an even more farcical crime possession of a truckload of stolen turkeys. The turkeys, it turned out, were stolen, and both brothers were arrested. Clyde didn't go to jail, that time at least, but the incident earned him a reputation. Turkey Man Clyde. Law fooled around, kept taking him down, and locking him up in a cell. Till he said to me, I'll never be free, so I'll meet a few of them in hell. The road was so dimly lighted, there were no highway signs to guide, but they made up their minds, if all roads were blind, they wouldn't give up till they lied. Number 6. Clyde chopped off 2 of his toes in prison. While serving a 14-year sentence in Texas for robbery and automobile theft in January 1932, Clyde decided he could no longer endure the unforgiving work and brutal conditions at the notoriously tough East Ham prison farm. In the hopes of forcing a transfer to a less harsh facility, Clyde severed his left big toe and a portion of a second toe with an axe, although it is not known whether he or another prisoner wielded the sharp instrument. The self-mutilation, which permanently crippled his walking stride and prevented him from wearing shoes while driving, ultimately proved unnecessary as he was released on parole 6 days later. Another example of Clyde really getting the timing wrong on another big decision. It seems Bonnie was the brains of the operations, because if it was Clyde, I think they'd be unlucky in their robberies. The road gets dimmer and dimmer. Sometimes you can hardly see. But it's fight man to man and do all you can, for they know they can never be free. From heartbreak, some people have suffered. From weariness, some people have cried. But take it all in all, our troubles are small till we get like Bonnie and Clyde. Number 5. Bonnie and Clyde, notorious bank robbers, actually didn't like robbing banks. Take that in. Bonnie, Clyde, and their associates went on a crime spree from the summer of 1932 through the spring of 1934, so they're often associated with other famous outlaws of the era, like bank robber John Dillinger. But the Barrow Gang, Clyde was the undisputed leader, considered robbing banks too much trouble. Instead, they targeted shops and gas stations, which were less risky. That also means they didn't amass large sums of money and resorted to cracking open gumball machines for extra change.
What do about Bonnie and Clyde?
We will capture them. Write that down and underline it twice.
Although often depicted as Depression-era Robin Hoods who stole from rich and powerful financial institutions, Bonnie and Clyde staged far more robberies of mom-and-pop gas stations and grocery stores than bank heists. It's kind of disappointing. If a policeman is ended in Dallas and they have no clue or guide, if they can't find a fiend, they just wipe their slate clean and hang it on Bonnie and Clyde. There's 2 crimes committed in America, not a credit to the Barrow mob. They had no hand in the kidnap demand, nor the Kansas City depot job. Number 4. Bonnie was involved in a car accident that left her with a limp. On the night of June 10th, 1933, Clyde, with Bonnie in the passenger seat, was speeding along the rural roads of North Texas so quickly that he missed a detour sign warning of a bridge under construction. The duo's Ford V8 smashed through a barricade at 70 miles per hour and sailed through the air before landing in a dry riverbed. Scalding acid poured out of the smashed car battery and severely burned Bonnie's right leg, eating away at her flesh down to the bone in some places. As a result of the 3rd-degree burns, Bonnie, like Clyde, walked with a pronounced limp for the rest of her life, and she had such difficulty walking that at times she hopped or needed Clyde to carry her. That's a good boyfriend right there. Except when he crashed their car, and when he dragged his girlfriend into a life of crime. Okay, maybe he's not the best boyfriend. A newsboy once said to his buddy, "I wish old Clyde would get jumped. In these awful hard times, we'd make a few dimes if 5 or 6 cops would get bumped. The police haven't got the report yet, but Clyde called me up today. He said, 'Don't start any fights, we aren't working nights, we're joining the NRA.'" Number 3. People at the scene of their passings wanted to take souvenirs of their bodies. On May 23, 1934, a 6-man posse led by former Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hamer ambushed Bonnie and Clyde and pumped more than 130 rounds of steel-jacketed bullets into their stolen Ford V8 outside Sales, Louisiana. After dozens of robberies and 13 slaughters in their name, Bonnie and Clyde's crime spree had finally come to an end. With acrid gun smoke still lingering in the air, gawkers descended upon the ambush site and attempted to leave with macabre souvenirs from the bodies of the outlaws still slumped in the front seat. According to Jeff Gwynn's book, Go Down Together, one man tried to cut off Clyde's ear with a pocket knife, and another attempted to sever his trigger finger before the lawmen intervened. One person in the ordeal, however, managed to clip locks of Bonnie's hair and swaths of her blood-soaked dress. That guy's a lucky guy, he must be selling it on Etsy right now. From Irving to West Dallas Viaduct is known as the Great Divide, where the women are kin, and the men are men, and they won't stool on Bonnie and Clyde. If they try to act like citizens and rent them a nice little flat, about the 3rd night, they're invited to fight by a subgun's rat-a-tat-tat. Number 2, their car is on display at a casino. Following the ambush of Bonnie and Clyde, a Louisiana sheriff who was a member of Hamer's 6-man posse claimed the pockmarked Ford V8 sedan still coated with the outlaws' blood and tissue. A federal judge, however, ruled that the automobile stolen by Bonnie and Clyde should return to its former owner, Ruth Warren of Topeka, Kansas. Warren leased and eventually sold the car to Charles Stanley, an anti-crime lecturer who toured fairgrounds with the Demise car, and the mothers of Bonnie and Clyde in tow as sideshow attractions. Still speckled with bullet holes, the Demise car is on display at Whiskey Pete's Resort and Casino near Las Vegas, Nevada.
Hey, isn't that Malcolm there?
They don't think they're too smart or desperate. They know that the law always wins. They've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that demise is the wages of sin. Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's demise for Bonnie and Clyde. Number 1, they were buried separately. Although linked in life, Bonnie and Clyde were split after their passings. While the pair wished to be buried side by side, if you remember her poem, Bonnie's mother, who had disapproved of her relationship with Clyde, had her daughter buried in a separate Dallas cemetery. Clyde was buried next to his brother Marvin underneath a gravestone with his hand-picked epitaph, "Gone but not forgotten." Stories about how Bonnie and Clyde met vary. One account written after their passings says Clyde visited a female friend's house while Bonnie made hot chocolate in the kitchen. Others say they met at a party, but nearly everyone agrees that they were inseparable from the start. As one member of their gang put it, Bonnie was like Clyde. They had grit. They meant to stay free or go down together. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time, baby.